This is the Uncensored Debate, and my panelists, as I have introduced them to you, we continue the discussion around whether or not President Cyril Ramaphosa is fit for purpose. Let me come to you, Professor Duvenage. Speculation is rife. If you look at various papers, specifically the Sunday Times, they carrying some of the commentary there which says that the president might just wield the axe this week. If he does not do that, and if I let on to what Professor Ndletyana said just moments ago, that he was contradicted by one of his cabinet ministers on a statement that he had made on a very, very important issue that has seen over 300 people lose their lives, not because of COVID-19, but the unrest that we saw. If the president takes longer to effect this cabinet reshuffle, what is the risk to his credibility and authority as leader of the country?
Well, I think you already touched on the risk. There's a huge political risk. At this point in time, if I must make an assessment of the priority with regard to political stability, instability on the one side and the COVID pandemic on the other side, I believe that there's more risks involved for South Africans when it comes to the stability, instability scenario. And that is directly reflecting on the type of leadership we need. And to be honest, we had a conversation about the president, but there's also not a lot of talent in the cabinet itself. Your ministers are underperforming in a number of ways, and we have seen that to a large extent within the security cluster. And it's my assessment that the president make strong changes to his cabinet. He cannot always follow the principle of representativity. And with representativity, I'm referring to representative in terms of the broad church of the ANC. You need to be working towards people that can really be of value, that can take the system forward. And unfortunately, at the moment, there's a huge lack of leadership. I honestly think that there was already a time to make these moves, but then we saw the instability happen in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. But yes, there's a need for changes.
Birght, Hlongwane, if Professor Duvenage says there isn't a lot of talent, in particular in the security cluster, is there any talent, or is there lots of it, at least in the economic cluster?
There is lack of talent in all clusters, Gampi. First and foremost, all these ministers, some of them don't have the skill in the ministry they are leading. So it's hard for them to accustom themselves to leading that particular ministry because they have not been in the industry or in the field they are leading. Also, there's no consequence management in the cabinet of Ramaphosa. You can do whatever you like. No one is going to harm you, or no one is going to say anything to you. So, especially in the economic cluster, you have heard my colleague here saying there have been contradictions. How can you contradict your boss and get away with it? So it's that particular issue. Secondly, all of these ministers, some of them are not even willing to come and bring young people to the table so that they can get fresh ideas, fresh energy, especially from young people who have been in those respective fields. So the talent part is resting on the importance of them bringing young people to the table and hearing what young people are saying. Then maybe we can see talent in that particular cabinet.
Sanusha, Naidu, have we seen the last of the ugly scenes that we saw in the past week or so? Have we turned the page, or are we likely to see more? And if your answer is to the latter, what might be the reason why we have not seen the last of the unrest that we saw?
You know, Koli, we live in a very uncertain time, and I think last week was just a reflection of what you call in political risk analysis a VUCA model: vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and whether that expands and expounds itself even further along the lines of how people are feeling on the ground. Are they feeling safe? Are they feeling as if the tide has turned, as if the situation has stabilized? And I think at this point in time, people are not at that point. They're not at that level of feeling as if we are in a situation where there's confidence, there's trust, and there's the ability of feeling safe. And whether or not it's going to be issues that are going to compound what we saw last week, and even going further than that, and how those issues compound each other is going to be critical. I mean, have we seen the last of other areas that come into play? I mean, we know about the Transnet question and the cybersecurity threat and what happened there. Trying to disaggregate that and say it wasn't part of what was happening in the last 2 weeks. But again, it represents different avenues in terms of the broader set of governance questions with regard to how prepared and how do these different ministries communicate with each other? Are these ministers actually communicating at the cabinet level? There's going to be a cabinet Hlongwane sometime soon. And I don't know how the president feels going into that cabinet Hlongwane, knowing that he's got ministers that have contradicted him. He's got ministers that haven't really relayed information to each other. The security cluster is in a shambles. There's the disruption to our regional value chain, the economic disruption, the socio-economic disruption. People are just very, very angry on the ground. You see the scenes unfolding with regard to, I was shocked how many people actually have private ammunition and arms and guns, and how that came out. So I think at the end of the day, we cannot assume with any sense of probability that we're basically in a situation of calm, stability, and security.
Prof. Ndletyana, if we have not seen the last of the chaos that we saw, which led to the deaths of 340 people, where might the threat still lie, or who might still instigate this?
Well, our country still faces a lot of challenges, socio-economic challenges. We have a lot of crime. So long as you have that dire situation, you always have this danger present all along. But I think there's a lack of this insufficient thinking and some level of strategizing. Yeah. For instance, if you take over government and one of the problematic areas is your intelligence, knowing what JZ did with that intelligence ministry and the kind of things that they did, and subsequently you have all sorts of, of reports about what had been happening in that ministry. As president, you know how that department is important for your success. So you need to prioritize it. You need to put in your best minister, but not only that, you need to monitor it constantly. The same applies to the police department, because, crime is there, and crime has an impact on your levels of confidence, investment in the country. So those are strategic together with your finance. Those are all key departments. Finance maybe has been doing fairly well because you have a well-established bureaucracy there. But in the police and the intelligence, I think the president has not had his hands on there, especially in the intelligence. I mean, to have this problem has been with us for more than close to 4 years now. And it shows, that department has not been turned around. So that's a serious indictment on the president, because he's the one in charge. But most importantly, you need a wholesale change of that cabinet. You need to inject new energy. You need much younger people with fresh ideas. You have tired people in that presidency. You can't have people who've been ministers for more than 20 years. These people don't care to impress anymore. So they are tired. They have no fresh ideas. You need young people who are keen to make their names and to make a good impression. So it's a structural thing. It's a mindset thing. There's this dependence on old people.
Yeah.
Whether or not they are capable or they are energetic seems to be immaterial. There isn't sufficient emphasis on competence. It's more on seniority. So we need to change this thing around and look at competence instead of seniority.
Well, I think all of you have actually said a mouthful, especially around the security cluster. Perhaps it is that point where I just give you a sense of what this complaint is about around our security forces in the country, and in particular, the people who are leading this so-called security cluster. Let's just have a listen to some of what the president had to say, and then you follow that, followed by his ministers. Let's have a listen.
Decision of the National Security Council is that there was an attempted insurrection. So the matter here, the issue was not about coming out and in defiance or in contradiction of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. I would not do that. I'm not the kind to do that.
Our responsibility as SSA is to gather information, correlate information, package it properly for a client. It becomes intelligence, and we hand it over to law enforcement or a department that so needs that information. More than that, there's nothing that we can do. We provide intelligence product to our client. The police are our client. In certain instances, the defense force would be our client. All other departments of government become our clients.
Says we have given the product. It's you, Minister, that would have given the product to me. Because the Minister of SSA could not give the product direct to the other DG. It would have to come via me, and I gave it to the National Commissioner. And I want to repeat here, I've never seen that product. Not I have never seen the product. These products you sign when you receive them. You sign. When you receive the product of state security, you sign. You go and check my signature. So I want to end there on that one.
Well, there you have it. Professor Duvenage, the police minister, says he never had the product to begin with. This is now the exchange between himself and the Minister of State Security, who was asserting that intelligence was given to the police did not act. If a major shake-up in the security cluster is to occur, Professor Ndletyana says it needs to go deep in order for it to have lasting change. How far does the president go?
Well, at the
Professor Duvenage frozen there. Perhaps let's take it to Prof. I think all right. I think you keep breaking. I think we might have you back now. Let's try again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're better now.
Okay. I think it is an open question how the president is going to deal with this. But I think this is a kairos moment for him, a time for decision making. And I agree with Professor Ndletyana that we need to take strong action in this regard. Historically, we had the example in the late 70s when P.W. Botha took over in the National Party. He got rid of Boss. He brought in someone completely new in the name of Neil Barnard, and he established the National Intelligence Service at that point. I think we are before such a renewal. That is what we need. About the Minister of Police, Birght, I can assure you that I'm not sure what is the product he is referring to that he need to see. Because there were so many made, so many products, so many viewpoints analyzing the situation in South Africa. It seems that he is the only person who didn't know what was going on in the country, and that is very concerning to me. My take on it is we need to see a complete restructuring of the security cluster. We need to see new political heads, and we need to see a clean-up operation getting rid of the ex-Zuma elements who is under investigation within the Zondo Commission anyway.
Birght Hlongwane, you lead an organization of young people in business. The amount of damage we have seen in the past week, in part led by the very young people. What does the president need to do in order to talk or appeal to this community of citizens?
I think the biggest thing the president needs to do now is to bring young people into confidence that he is in their favor. As things stand now, we are on our own. The president is doing something else and is not taking our interest, is not having our interest at heart. So the biggest thing His Excellency can do for us is to take us into confidence that he trusts young people can take South Africa forward. On the part of the vandalizing and damaging of the infrastructure done by young people, some may say it's because of hunger, some may say it's crime. But we need to look deep at what caused them to cause these riots. Secondly, we need to also understand that young people currently have a 74% youth unemployment. So this thing is affecting them on a daily basis. Not condoning that they should go and loot, but we need to understand that there is a structural issue or structural problem of them being unemployed. Now they have no other option other than to resort to crime. So government must create programs that are going to ensure that young people are at school, young people are running businesses, young people are actively involved in the economy of South Africa. Because if they are not involved or engaged in the economic process of South Africa, they have no other thing to do except to resort to crime, resort to substance abuse. So the president needs to understand that he needs to formulate a plan and implement it on how to engage young people in the economy of the country. The Youth in Business recently wrote a letter to the NYDA and the Ministry of Small Business Development, trying to seek assistance for the young entrepreneurs whose businesses were vandalized. Some of them have even indicated that they want to open a shop again. Why? Because there is that lack of availability of resources. The NYDA alone has a 500 million youth budget, which 37% of that money goes to salaries. How can you take care of 20 million young South Africans with 500 million, whereas we see other monies being mismanaged? So the government, especially His Excellency, needs to take us into confidence that he is going to take care of young people's interests and he is going to let young people be part of the economy and its processes in South Africa.
Sanusha, Naidu and Prof. Ndletyana, we're going to get your thoughts in a moment. Let's take a breather. When we return, Peter Bruce writes today in the Sunday Times reminding us that Begicele and his Commissioner of Police are hardly on speaking terms. Perhaps that's a point we may pick up on. This is Politics Unscripted. You're watching Politics Unscripted, and we are discussing the leadership vacuum in the country. Sanusha Naidu, let's pick up with you. Just moments ago, I was talking about an opinion piece written by columnist Peter Bruce on the Sunday Times today, who reminds us that Begicele, the Minister of Police, and his police commissioner are hardly on speaking terms, by the way. Might that be part of the reason why we saw the cataclysmic failure with running battles for at least a week before there was any sort of action from the police's side?
I'm not 100% sure that's a reason to put forward only. I think it's one of the reasons that perhaps a breakdown of communication between the police minister and the commissioner. These issues have been in the public domain for a long time about the lack of engagement, lack of communication, questions of personality clashes, and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, it is about how this government works with each other. I mean, just listening to the inserts you put, you were played earlier, Pole. The problem is the language. I mean, State Security Agency talks about the police ministry being a client of theirs. They talk about a product. I mean, this is not how you run a government. This is not business incorporated. But, if it was the business, I think everybody would have been fired by now because of not coming to any kind of accountability. But this is not how you run a government. I mean, this is not what we're talking about. I think the challenge here is, how much does this bureaucracy actually gel? Are they cohesive? Do they listen to each other? And I think the point made earlier about the overhaul of this government, or of this cabinet and this bureaucracy, comes back to a more fundamental question, and that is how bold the president is going to be in terms of saying, I'm not going to take on cadre deployment here and put senior ministers who have basically possibly even passed their shelf life date to a large extent, put them into positions and give them ministries, but rather bring in people that may not be in this party. We can't afford to have that. We need to have young people. We have to have thinkers. We have to have strategists. And we've got to have people that implement. I don't think we need more plans. We've got enough plans to keep us going for another 1,000 years. But we need implementation. And we need to actually find that those performance agreements that were signed as contracts and KPAs and whatever, they need to start being pulled out and said, have you lived up to those expectations and those performance agreements? So I think at the end of the day, we're going around as well in terms of, these personality clashes are there. They've always been there. The bureaucracy has had its own internal dynamics of whether they fully support the presidency and they fully support implementation. There's bottlenecks, institutional bottlenecks, its capabilities, its capacities, its resources. But we can't keep going in that circle, that we keep going through a revolving door around it. So somewhere along the line, something's got to give in this whole context. And the question then is, would we see people that are going to come into the government as part of the bureaucracy, as part of the ministry, to be those that don't come within the party circle? Because the other challenge we have here is the party and the relationship between party and state. And we've been forewarned so many times about how caustic that relationship is. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it also serves as a salary bill for the party.
Let me just add to that, Tony, before you ask me your own question. Sure. I think increasingly what is emerging in this discussion, and having thought about it and listened to everybody else, is that our president has not been an effective leader. Because you have these cluster committees. All these ministers meet and they exchange information, their priorities for government, and he sits there to facilitate all this. So he has this bird's eye view about all these urgent issues that have to be acted upon. And he's not facilitating effective communication, implementation, and following up on people to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. So he is an increasingly emerging as an ineffective leader. Because these things ordinarily, if someone had his fingers on the pulse, if you had your eyes on the ball, you would not have ministers bickering like this. I mean, it is utterly embarrassing that these are folks in the third year of the cabinet of this presidency. They don't know what they are supposed to do, right? So this tells you that they probably don't meet as often as they ought to, and it is the duty of the president. These are his assistants. The president has the overall agenda. Ministers are delegated. Yes, they have clearly defined duties, but essentially those things are delegated to them to do on behalf of the president. So as the chief, he has to ensure that he measures, he monitors, just to ascertain that these things that he thinks ought to define his own presidency actually get done. He's not monitoring. I mean, it's a terrible thing, because it then means that if you're not monitoring, you will never get certainty that your things or your agenda is being implemented. And for that reason, and it's a little bit disappointing, because when he came in, he comes with a corporate sector experience, kind of a managerial experience. But here, I mean, the events of the last few days and the embarrassing bickering among these ministers tells us that it doesn't seem to be a center here holding as it ought to hold, especially given the enormity of the problems that we have.
Well, I think on those exact words, we're going to have to end it there, unfortunately. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation. Really worthy of the comments that you all have given here. He is going to speak tonight, the President, at around 8:30. We're going to have to listen out to what the President is going to tell the nation. But clearly, Mr. President, there's a lot that needs to be done from your end as leader of the country. Thank you very much to all my panelists, Sanusha, Naidu, Professor Mcebisi, Ndletyana, Professor Duvenage, and last but not least, Birght Hlongwane from the Youth in Business here in South Africa.